Chapter 11. Wisdom, Free Will, and Willingness. A message from the voice of Christ through a chorus of angels in the presence of Archangel Raphael and Archangel Gabriel. Episode 1. The Power of Will. My love, pure soul, we love you with a perfect love. We have come through the will of the Father for the love of all humanity. We thank you for your eyes to wisdom that is not of this world. Today we continue with the theme of the previous session. Given the vastness of its meaning, it is important to remember that the totality of the fullness of love can never be grasped. But this is not a cause for either worry or spiritual laziness. To have a loving attitude towards wisdom, your eternal mother, the source of your being, is to love what you truly are. To be willing to be informed through the shining of truth, which is the name we give to eternal wisdom, is to let yourself be loved. Everything comes from the wisdom of God. You yourself are its expression. Therefore, wisdom is your destiny, your achievement, and your being. Today we let go of the fear of the power of your will, of which we have already spoken, but now see in a new light. In the past, you experienced the power of your will and became afraid of it, since you believed that it led you to perdition. You were afraid of what you did with your life, and you know that in one way or another it was your will that directed it. You have tried to convince yourself that nothing was your responsibility, that nothing was the result of your will, that what happened in your life was the whim of fate, and fate that sometimes gave you something sweet, then deceived you and took it away, replacing it with a poisoned apple, whereupon you sank into a dream of oblivion, ignorance, and unconsciousness of your true self. For all this you blame yourself, your will. We have already spoken of blame. You know there is no difference between blaming others and blaming yourself. How could you not fear something so frightening? It's a power that seems to have configured your conscious existence so far. Undesirable at least, painful at worst, not fearful. The power of your will is immense, even immeasurable. You fear it above all fears. The power of your will is the power of God, which is the power of love. Because you feared it, you chose to enslave it to reduce its power. You wished to subdue and control the power of your will. When you were repeatedly told to let yourself be loved, it was meant to trust and let yourself go, as your will permits. Constraining your will reduces your freedom and your consciousness. To not be conscious of your whole being is what is meant by separation, or a lack of fulfillment. You did not consciously separate from God. You did not consciously separate yourself from your brothers and sisters. Otherwise, you could not have come into existence, nor would you be so faithful to the human experience. Nor did you separate yourself from life, for you want to live and to exist. Even expressing yourself in ways that often go beyond what sanity would advise. To live in freedom is to free your will from the tyranny of the ego to which you have subjected yourself for so long. The ego was presented to you as an alien being, something separate from you, to make it easier for you to distance yourself and transcend the illusory part of your mind. Wisdom used an indirect approach, so you might detach yourself from the untrue part of you. Nevertheless, the ego is your deliberate decision to do other than God's will, your decision. The ego is the result of your choice, not in truth, but in the illusion, although this distinction is irrelevant now. The ego is based in ignorance because it assumes that something alien to God can exist. Thus it was your pseudo-creation, a world where something can appear to be accomplished that is not the will of God. It is somewhat like a child who goes to his room, locks the door, and hides under the bed, to do something contrary to his mother's will. It believes that the toy hidden from her gaze in rebellion would not be taken away. With such a belief you created a will alien to God. Then you left paradise and hid because of the shame you felt. Section 2. Will and Desire. Holy brothers and sisters, you are ashamed of yourself, of what you are, and of what you have done with your lives, both individually and collectively. You see how much foolishness and cruelty in the world, and are ashamed of human nature. Today we recognize that shame, accept it, and then release it forever. It has no foundation. Shame is disabling, and in order to release it we must accept once and for all the truth that fear is the denial of God's will. It is hate, a lack of love, the wish for your will to prevail over God's. There is a direct relationship between your fear and your rebellion against the will of God. You should be aware, however, that actually you and God agree on almost everything, except on this matter of will. Not doing God's will is not doing your will either, because God and you are one. You know this intellectually, but intellectual knowledge is not sufficient. Not doing the will of God deprives you of freedom. And a will that is not free is intrinsically contradictory, since the will must be free to be what it is. Thus, not living harmoniously with the will of love is not doing your own will. You must also accept that anger arises in you when you do not follow your own will. Every time you notice yourself doing something unwillingly, then not only is there anger, but it leads to error. Doing what you do not want to do for the mere fact of pleasing the apparent will of another sooner or later generates suffering because part of you rebels. Anger is the messenger telling you that you are not acting from your own will, that you are doing what you do not want to do. There is a connection between will and desire. This association must be understood more clearly. Anger with yourself comes from your thwarted will, which you blame for decisions you consider wrong in your life. All this arises from confusion. What you consider your will was not your true will, but simply your wish. Confusing wishes and desires with the will is common because the ego created desire to replace the will. God does not desire. The will does not desire. It allows. Being guided by the desires of the ego has been the way you have lived prior to this time of freedom. There was no option while you were identified with the ego, a body and a personality. It would be foolish to blame yourself. You could not help identifying with desires because you considered them part of your will. Thus you became a slave to desire, and you felt a loss of freedom. It is quite absurd to believe that something as unstable as desire could come from the true will of God. It is one thing to follow your will. It is altogether different to dedicate yourself to satisfying your desires or whims or those of others. Satisfaction of needs of all kinds is the maxim of the ego. Sisters and brothers in Christ, the ego cannot do otherwise. Do not blame the ego or the ego of others. It is what the ego is. Accept what is, as it is. To accept in this manner is to reconcile yourself with the ego world. Do not pretend that the ego is different from what it is, or try to change or subdue it. Let the ego be what it wants to be while you remain established in the truth of who you are. Remember, the universe has room for everyone and everything, including the ego. Therefore, do not be concerned about ego's tireless tricks that keep you confused between desires and will. You need not remain in that sea of fear. Your will is powerful. Fear it not. Calmly trust that the divine will guide you beyond your thinking mind and all the world's reasoning, and welcome the power of love that lives in your being, and let it expand. Section 3. Release. Sons and daughters, beloveds, leave behind the old wishes that guided your actions and your life. Desires are loud but blind and deaf. If a blind person guides you, you will fall into a ditch. You have felt that fall, being guided by the thinking mind and consequently by desires and needs. You lost your way. By letting the thinking mind master your life, you were led to error. The thinking mind, that is your own interpretations, which come from the wisdom of the world and from your attachment to the lower mind, is what has enslaved your will. We have already spoken about the tyranny of the ego mind, or thinking mind, over your life, and the liberation that has already happened. Now all that remains is simply to live in freedom. We are repeating this. This is because the pattern of thinking that says the problem of life must be solved by means of the old methods of egoic thought is still active, though with less and less force. This old pattern is almost gone. Soon it will disappear. The time has come to let go of the attachment to the reasoning of the thinking mind. It has enslaved you, not the true mind that has been given to you, the Christ mind, but that habit of looking for explanations on your own, to give meaning to everything. To think on your own, individually or collectively, is to think without God. That is what is meant by making a will alien to the will of the Creator. You think that the thinking mind helped you to survive, and you consider it a great achievement to have dedicated yourself to trying to solve the riddles of life. You also consider that this part of the mind is what defines your superiority in relation to other beings, at least those who you consider less intelligent. Is it not true that the world considers human intelligence to be a trait of superiority and competitive advantage with other beings, if not with everything created? This love of logical intelligence and your consideration of it as your guide to everything is what we will release today, because it is not grounded in love, but is an attachment which comes from fear. Holy sons and daughters, let your mind go today. It will go without making a fuss. You are ready to let your life be led by the wisdom of God, rather than the intelligence of the world. One is given freely and will never fail you, because it is God Himself and surpasses all reasoning. About the other you already know. What a joy to know that you are ready to be free. Free from exhausting interpretations and the speculative thinking of the lower mind. You do not need it. You never needed it. Believe us when we tell you that attachment to that part of the mind is what prevents you from being free and from living in the fullness of love. Cease to value it so highly, for it never gave you anything that your will has truly arranged. Many still mistakenly believe that that part of the mind, the habit of think speculatively without anchoring into the wisdom of love, is what allowed advancement through technology and science. But you do not believe that anymore, nor do those who are united in the truth of Christ, because you know it is not true. You know that human intelligence, as you call it, has given you as many advances as setbacks. Today we open our minds and hearts to feel comfortable with the freedom that is already yours. Today, we open our minds and hearts to feel comfortable with the freedom that is already ours. We begin to live in peace and joy with the fact that our mind no longer thinks, nor does it need to. Now Christ in us thinks. Now we leave intelligence aside and welcome wisdom.